Okay, so yesterday we revisited the rules for multiplying positive and negative integers. And that was a review from what you learned last year in 6th grade. So today what we're going to talk about is multiplying rational numbers. So now remember, rational numbers can look like fractions or they can look like decimals. So we're going to talk about both today. We're going to talk about multiplying positive and negative fractions, and we're going to talk about multiplying positive and negative decimals. So when we have a problem that looks like this, we have two numbers that are multiplied together, and they both have fractions in them. So how would I solve this problem? Can anybody tell me? Okay, so no one can answer. That's fine. So let's talk about what we need to do. We have fractions. So anytime you have fractions, you need to make sure that you turn all of your numbers into fractions first. So if there is a fraction in any part of the problem, convert all the numbers to fractions. So that means whole numbers and mixed numbers. So the first thing we want to do is we want to change the mixed numbers to improper fractions. And we learned how to do that yesterday, or excuse me, the day before with the circle method. Okay. And then the second thing we want to do is we want to change any whole numbers into a fraction by just putting the whole number over the number 1. So we're just going to put it over the number 1. So for example, if I have the number 4 and I want to make that to look like a fraction in the traditional form of fraction, we say 4 over 1. 4 becomes the numerator and the number 1 becomes the denominator. Now, once all of the numbers look like fractions, we're going to multiply the numerators together to get the value of my new numerator, and then we're going to multiply the denominators to get the new value of the answer in the denominator. And then last, we're going to simplify the answer. Anytime we have a fraction as our final answer, we may have to reduce it or simplify it. And then our very last step is going to be to determine the sign of my final answer. Now, remember from yesterday what we can use to help us find the sign. We can use the mouse. So we can use the mouse, and we call him what? Sleepy Mouse. We can use the triangle, or we can use the tic-tac-toe board. And now remember, we use these for multiplying and dividing only. These are the rules for multiplying and dividing. All right, so let's take these steps and let's apply them to this problem up here. We want both of these numbers to look like a fraction in the form A over B. We want it to look like a traditional fraction. Well, this looks like a traditional fraction. This one does not. So what we need to do is we need to convert this. So 1 1/4. We need to convert this using the circle method that we learned day before yesterday. And we're going to say, all right, we're going to come around this way. And then we're going to come around this way and pick up the top number. Then we're going to come all the way back down, and we're going to end at the denominator. So what this means is we take the denominator times 1. So I have a multiply sign here. 4 times 1 is 4. And then I'm going to add that to the one up top. So 4 times 1 equals 4. 4 plus 1 equals 5. And then I'm going to bring it around, and I'm going to end with the denominator of 4. So we're going to end with the denominator of 4. So 1 1/4 is equivalent to the improper fraction 5 over 4. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite the problem. And we're going to say negative 3/5 times, and now I'm going to use my new traditional fraction, 5 over 4. Then all I have to do is multiply across the top to get my new numerator and across the bottom to get my new denominator. So don't skip this step because this is going to be really important. So I'm going to take negative 3. The negative sign stays with the number up top. So I'm going to say negative 3 times 5. And I'm going to go ahead and put them side by side like this in parentheses. This means multiply. Then I'm going to multiply the two denominators together. And we're going to say 5 times 4. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't like to use big numbers. So if you write your step this way, you get to do something special here. You get to factor out the 5. Now, what that means is we need to find a number upstairs that matches a number downstairs. Now, this only works if we're multiplying the numbers upstairs and then the numbers are being multiplied downstairs. So what we're really saying is that 5 is divisible by 5. So we're going to say 5 divided by 5 equals 1. 5 divided by 5 equals 1. And remember, what I do upstairs, I got to do downstairs. So if I cross the 5 up upstairs, I got to cross the 5 downstairs. And then that leaves me with negative 3 times 1. So we have a negative times a positive. So a negative times a positive. A negative times a positive would give me a negative. So negative 3 times 1 would be negative 3 over, and the only thing here is 1 times 4, so it would be 4, and we would have negative 3 over 4. Now, you could do it the other way. You could do negative 3 times 5, and that's going to give you negative 15, and then you're going to say 5 times 4, which is 20. And because these both end in 0 or 5, we know we can divide by 5, and we end up doing the same thing. That's exactly what we did when we did this. We divided by 5. So what I do to the top, I got to do to the bottom. And negative 15 divided by 5 is equal to 3. A negative divided by a positive. A negative divided by a positive equals a negative. So that has to be negative 3 over 20 divided by 5 is 4. So you can see both ways we get the same answer. It's just if you factor out like this, it's probably going to be a little bit easier. And if you learn this technique right now, it's going to make the rest of the year really, really, really fun. Okay, now let's move on to decimals so that, let's move on to decimals and find out what we need to do with decimals. So how would you solve this problem right here? 7.2 times negative 0.9. Okay, can anybody tell me how to solve this? And I'm going to put the Google Classroom on pause while we talk. Okay, now we're back. So we had some discussion. So what we decided was we can just do regular multiplication here, but what we need to do, we need to ignore the decimal points. So let's review the process real quick here. Okay, these are decimal numbers. So these are decimals. And if we multiply with decimals, this is what we need to do. When you multiply with decimal points, ignore the decimal points. Just ignore them from the very beginning. We're going to ignore the decimal points, and we're going to pretend that all of the numbers are whole numbers. So just ignore the decimal points. Just get rid of them. Then what we're going to do, since we now have whole numbers, is we're going to multiply them just like you would normally. So we're going to multiply the whole numbers. But then the next step, we have to do this. We have to count the number of decimal place values in both of the numbers that we're multiplying. Then in the final answer, we're going to move the decimal points to the left, the same number of spaces that you counted up here in the previous step. And then the last part of this process is determining the sign of the final answer. And remember, we can use the mouse, the triangle, or the tic-tac-toe board to help us keep track of the sign of the final answer. So let's go back up and let's actually do this problem together. Now remember what the first step is. Ignore the decimal point. So let's rewrite this. Just get rid of the decimal point. So we're going to say 72 times 9. You guys can do 72 times 9. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to say 72 times 9. So 9 times 2 is 18, carry the 1. 9 times 7 is 63 plus 1 is 64. Now, that is the product of 72 and 9, but we didn't multiply 72 and 9. We multiplied 7.2 and negative 0.9. So what we want to do is we want to go back here and we want to count how many place values there are past the decimal point in each one of these numbers. So there's one place value to the right of this decimal point. So that's one place value. And then there's one place value to the right here. So that's a total of 2 decimal place values. So then what I need to do is I need to take my decimal point and I place it at the very end, and I move the decimal point 2 places to the left, and I put my decimal point right there. So my answer is 6.48, but we have to find out the sign. Is the sign positive or negative? Well, we have a positive times a negative. So if we use the mouse, a positive times a negative equals a negative. So that means my answer has to be negative. The sign has to be negative. So the answer would be 6.48. So remember, we just multiply them like they're whole numbers. So just get rid of the decimal points, multiply them like they're whole numbers, count how many place values there are past the decimal point to the right. So we have 1 here, 1 here. So that gave us 2 place values. So then we go to the end of our answer and we move the decimal point 2 place values to the left. And that's all you have to do. That's easier than adding and subtracting. All right, so let's go to guided practice now. So let's look at a couple of problems, okay? Up here, you should draw whatever it is you want to use. So let's say I want to use the sleepy mouse. So he's going to have sleepy eyes, and then he's got a nose or a mouth. And we have to remember, this is for multiplying and dividing only. This only works for multiplying and dividing. So we have a decimal. We ignore the decimal point and we change this to negative 128, and we change this to 63. And then we're going to do the math. Now we have to do 128 times 63. So we have 3 times 8 is 24, carry the 2. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2, so 6, 7, 8. 3 times 1 is 3. Now I'm moving over one place value, and I'm going to be looking at the 6. So that means I have to put a placeholder here because I moved over one place value up here. 6 times 8 is 48, and I'm going to carry the 4. 6 times 2 is 12, plus 4 is 16. I'm going to carry the 1. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 1 is 7. So now I'm going to add all that together, and we're going to say 4 plus 0 is 4, 8 plus 8 is 16, carry the 1. 6 plus 3 is 9, plus 1 is 10, carry the 1. 7 plus 1 is 8. Now, we have a whole number as our answer, but remember, we have to go and we have to count how many place values there are past the decimal point in both of these numbers. So there's 1 place value, 2 place values. So there's 2 place values, and in my final answer, I need to move the decimal point from the end of the number. I need to move it 2 places to the left. So my answer would be 80.64, but is my sign positive or negative? We have a negative times a positive. A negative times a positive gives me a negative answer. So my answer has to be negative. And that would be our final answer. Now, let's look at this one real quick. We have 3/4 times -2. So this is a fraction. So we can rewrite both of them down here. 3/4 stays as a fraction. And I'm going to make -2 a fraction by putting it over 1. I just put the 1 underneath it in the denominator. Now it's really easy because all I have to do is multiply these two numbers together and multiply these two numbers together. So we're going to come down here, we're going to multiply those two numbers together. So we're going to say 3 times -2 is equal to -6 over 4 times 1. This means multiply when they're side by side like this. 4 times 1 is 4. Now we want to reduce this further. So I'm looking at this and I notice that these are both even numbers. So I want to make the number smaller. If I want to make it smaller, I have to divide. Since they're even numbers, I know I can divide both of them by 2. So I'm going to have -6 divided by 2. So what is a negative? A negative divided by a positive equals a negative. So my answer is going to be -6 divided by 2 is 3. 4 divided by 2 is 2. Now, looking at this, we can do one step further and we can divide 2 into 3. So 2 goes into 3 one time. I subtract the 2. That leaves me with 1 left over. So my partial quotient is 1 part out of 2. So my answer was negative. So when I convert it to a mixed number, it's -1.5. And that will be my final answer. Okay. So let's look at this one real quick. We have 5.7 times -4.2. So we're going to ignore the decimal points and we're just going to say their whole numbers. So we're going to say 57 times 42. So we're going to line that up and we're going to multiply. So we're going to say 57 times 42. 2 times 7 is 14, carry the 1. 2 times 5 is 10, plus 1 is 11. Now I'm scooting over one place value, so I got to put a 0 here because I've scooted over one place value. I'm in the 10th place value, so my answer has to go here in the 10th place value at this level. 4 times 7 is 28, carry the 2. 4 times 5 is 20, plus 2 is 22. And I'm going to add that all together. 4 plus 0 is 4. 8 plus 1 is 9. 2 plus 1 is 3. And then the 2 comes down. Now I need to go back up to my original numbers and count how many place values there are to the right of the decimal point. So there's 1, and then there's another one. So there's 2 place values. So that means in my final answer, I go to the end of my number and I move the decimal point 2 places to the left. So my answer is 23.94, but is it positive or negative? We had a positive number times a negative number. A positive number times a negative number means the answer has to be negative. So this would be negative, and that would be my final answer. Okay, let's see. Do we have another problem here? Okay, this is a good one because we have to convert this to a mixed, we have to convert this to an improper fraction. So we're going to go this way, we're going to go this way, and then we're going to come back around and end at the denominator. So we're going to say 2 times, now remember this whole thing stays negative. So 2 times 1 is 2. 2 plus 1 is 3. So that's going to be 3 over, come back around to the denominator of 2. So that's 2. This stays negative. So we have negative 3/2 times negative 7 over 8. So now all we have to do is multiply across the top. So we're going to say negative 7 times negative 3. Then we're going to say 8 times negative 2. And we're going to calculate our answer. So we're going to say negative 7 times negative 3 all over 8 times 2. So now, what is 7 times 3? 7 times 3 equals 21. The signs are both negative, so a negative times a negative gives me a positive. So my answer has to be positive 21. And then we have 8 times 2, which is 16. Now, we're still not done here because we need to convert this to a mixed number. So we're going to say 16 goes into 21 how many times? 16 goes into 21 one time. That's take away the 16. Borrow. 11 minus 6 is 5. 1 minus 1 is 0. So we have 1, and we're going to take the remainder of 5, and we're going to put it over, sorry about that. Let me get rid of that. We're going to take the 5, and we're going to put it over the number sitting in the front right here, which is 16. So my answer would be 1 and 5 over 16. Circle my answer. Okay, and that's it for today. So you get to go ahead and continue doing your work. Remember, convert your mixed numbers to improper fractions first. You're going to want to use the circle method. Make all of your numbers look like fractions. Going to multiply and then add. Okay, so we want all of our numbers to look like fractions. Remember, when you're doing decimals, you want to ignore the decimal point. So we ignore the decimal point. Okay, that's important to remember. Ignore the decimal point. All right, good luck.